my name's Eddie Adams. Despite my accent, a resident of York. And the more eagle-eyed amongst you will realise I'm not Ruth Redfern. So he's unfortunately had to pull out at the last minute. So I've been asked to moderate this session. We've heard some really helpful inputs, I think, from the plenary floor this morning about some of the big ticket issues. And now is a chance really to get under the skin a bit on some of these themes, to look specifically at issues of fairness and the communities. We're very keen, especially in these sessions, that we have lots of people with experience both within York, beyond York, and indeed beyond the UK, to make this as interactive as possible. It's not the most interactive setting I've ever worked in, I have to say, so we will do our best to try and engage you and try and involve you as much as possible. I'm just going to hand over shortly to each of our panel speakers, ask them to introduce themselves. They will then do a short input, again just setting the scene from their perspective, and then we'll pick up some themes from yourselves, carry on the conversation. In terms of timing, just so you know where we are, we'll run the session until 11:40. So although we're on conference time, as Kirsten called it, we are going to hopefully catch up a bit, because I also find these events, the coffee breaks are actually really important in terms of making connections and be able to carry on some of the discussions that you don't have the chance to do in these settings. So that's the plan. So thanks for bearing with us while we rearrange the furniture and have all the snapshots. So let's get started. I'll ask each of the panelists perhaps just to introduce themselves, and then we'll make a start in terms of our inputs, and we'll just go from our right to left.
Okay, I'm Geraldine Howley, Chief Executive of a housing association called In Communities in Bradford.
My name is Debbie Abrahams. I'm MP for Oldham East and Saddleworth. I'm also a member of the Shadow Health team, and I convened and chaired, or I am convening and chairing, the Oldham Fairness Commission.
I'm Kate Green. I'm the Member of Parliament for Stretford and Urmston in Greater Manchester. I'm also the Labour Shadow Spokesperson for Disabled People, and I am the Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Poverty. I was also a member of the Greater Manchester Poverty Commission, and before I was elected to Parliament, Chief Executive of the Child Poverty Action Group, so I'm a bit steeped in this agenda.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Steve Smith. I'm Professor of Political Philosophy and Social Policy at the University of South Wales, but I'm also Chair of Newport City Council's Fairness Commission.
My name's Liz Richardson. I work at the University of Manchester, and I try to do research that I hope will be useful for policy, mostly on democratic engagement and talking to communities.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Geraldine, can I just ask you just to get us started?
Yes, by all means, yeah. Okay, well, I'm obviously, as you have gathered, I'm not from York, but not too far away, from Yorkshire. And I'm responsible for a large housing association in Bradford. It's got about just under 23,000 homes. It was part of what we call a stock transfer. 11 years ago, it was council homes that came across to In Communities, and we were able to borrow quite a lot of money to refurbish the homes. And so whilst the homes are up to a decent standard, what we do have is a lot of sort of issues in terms of our customers and the lives that, you know, the poverty, and even though we have houses that are available, it's very, very sad when you're letting those homes and you see people are actually on floorboards because they can't afford furniture. We have 73% of our tenants that are on benefits, so there's huge issues, and Bradford is very, very divided in terms of incomes. There's a lot of wealthy people, but there's a lot of poverty. And as a housing association, and one of the biggest associations, or the biggest in Bradford and one of the largest in the country, we knew we had to do so much more than just be a landlord and continue to do our core business. So we changed our vision to improving lives in communities. And we're very values-based. All our staff now get recruited because of their values. Appraisals are very values-based. The training for competencies sort of can come later. And I'm very proud of our staff, because it's down to our staff that we have a credit union to try to stop some of our poorer tenants going to loan sharks. We're setting up a furniture store so that people can either purchase furniture and not go to Bright House, or if they can't purchase furniture, we're looking at a recycled furniture store. We have staff bringing clothes into work so that our tenants can go and wear clothes for interviews. And in the last couple of years, we've really majored hard on getting people into employment and training. And we've got a fantastic scheme with Bradford Council. It's called the Employment Opportunities Fund. We've got 400 extra contracts in communities, and we've taken on 200 of those people, and that's very much based at our tenants, but also other people in the district, and it's about giving people placements and with an income as well. We pay those people to work in our organisation. We also are aware of people that are not even ready to get into work, they don't have the confidence, they may have childcare issues, and we're very fortunate to get some European funding to operate a scheme called Locally Grown. And those people haven't got the confidence to come out of the areas where they live. They can go to the community centres, they can have training, they can up their skills, they can be mentored in terms of CVs and getting into work. And if people actually still don't feel ready to work, we continue working with those tenants. So we have sort of schemes like allotment schemes, Locally Grown, and things like that. But there's childcare is available as well. We have a high, about a quarter of our community in Bradford is of Asian heritage. And we do quite a lot in terms of encouraging people from those communities and other diverse communities to come and work for us. And I think one of the things that's pleased me recently is that obviously a lot of people have second languages, and what we've done is work to give those people a job. So now we have a lot of those people that have come through, we have trained them, they set up their own businesses, they work in terms of translation services both for ourselves and for the NHS. So there's a lot that we're doing in terms of improving people's lives, and to say it's proved dividends in terms of the confidence from some of our tenants. There's still a lot to do, because we know as soon as we get people on that ladder into employment, they may move elsewhere, and then we have incoming people that still need the same help. So, working with the food banks, working with credit unions, or partnering with credit unions, making sure people have furniture, making sure that our rents are not too high. And I think the key is, and I think Julia said this, not thinking you can do everything on your own, but working in collaboration with other people, and by partnering with other agencies, you can produce so much more in tackling those issues of fairness and poverty. Thank you.
Thanks, Geraldine. So some key points there about housing, about working with staff, about building the collaborative base across cities. And I think one of the key questions today for me is as much about the how as about the what. Practically, what can we do? So thanks for that, and it's good to have an input from West Yorkshire to get us started. And then moving across the Pennines to Oldham,
yes.
Debbie?
Just over the Pennines, yes. Just as a sort of bit of background, my professional background was actually in public health, and I was spent the last 10 years of my life in academia, in particular looking at health inequality. So when I became an MP and when I was identifying priorities with local people, it was very clear that this was, again, inequalities which persisted across Oldham was going to be a key aspect of my campaign. So in July last year, as one of my top 10 priorities, I convened and chaired and launched the Oldham Fairness Commission. Our focus has been very much on education, on employment, and also on income. And if we look at some of the issues that are facing Oldham, it was absolutely unacceptable to me, but also, as Geraldine said, across the swathe of partners that we've managed to engage, the commissioners for the Oldham Fair Commission, which have gone from education to housing to the private sector, the police, the voluntary sector, of course the local authority as well, and it's so important that we do have that wide-ranging involvement. And business as well. I mean, we've been very clear that that's obviously a very important sector to engage with as well. But just to if I could tell you some of the statistics that we have identified, and the reason that we're focusing and honing down on these key areas. there's up to a 30% gap in educational attainment for children and young people who are looked after, disabled, or from an ethnic minority group compared with the older average. And again, it's absolutely unacceptable that range of gap exists. Also, you're more likely to be employed if you're a white, male and able-bodied in Oldham. And a third of the jobs in Oldham are below the living wage, which is the highest. If we compare Oldham to statistically comparable neighbourhoods, it's the highest in the northwest. And with that sort of context, there was a real enthusiasm and commitment when we were, as I say, we launched in July last year, in us working together to define what the underlying causes around these inequalities in Oldham were, and work together in a partnership to address these locally and beyond. In addition to myself, the other MPs for Oldham were also engaged, and we thought as well it's absolutely vital that we have all parties involved at the local level as well. And of course, you'll be aware that these socioeconomic inequalities will in turn affect the life expectancy and the inequalities in this. And it's an 11-year gap, 11 years across my constituency, from the poorest parts of Oldham East to the more affluent parts of Saddleworth. And as Frank Dobson, when he was Secretary of State for Health in 1997, said, inequality in health is the worst inequality of all. There is no more serious inequality than knowing that you will die sooner because you're badly off. And that really, again, is another point that has driven us. But something that we have been absolutely focused on as well is about, we can look at the different causes, if you want, of this health inequality. But we also need to be aware of the sort of social processes, the balance in power, and how we can change how we work across Oldham. I think that not all these inequalities are inevitable or fixed, and we need to recognise that. I'm struck by something that Margaret Whitehead told me when she was a chair of public health at Liverpool, where I worked before I became an MP. And she says, no law of nature that decrees that children from poor families are going to die at twice the rate of children from more affluent families. And I think, that's something that has really driven us. So we've had 3 inquiries, each on the different areas that I've mentioned that we're focusing on. We're just about in the process of writing up our recommendations for that. And again, there's been, as I say, it's the importance of the partnership between the different sectors and different agencies has been really, really important, as well as contributions from people like Richard, who attended our most recent hearing, which was on income inequalities. But we have, as I say, through the partners, identified a number of directions that we will be going towards. So, for example, there is a commitment through the Council of implementing a living wage. We have a draft Fair Employment Charter, which is trying to encourage employers to also commit to paying a living wage, as well as committing to apprenticeships. And we have the Get Oldham Working Initiative, which is not only in terms of trying to ensure that work is a route out of poverty for many, but that we also recognise the range of opportunities in increasing what is currently a low-skill economy into a high-skill one. And my commitment to that is this year I'm launching my summer school for young people for 18 to 24-year-olds, which is about really connecting community activism with the political process. I think that's, again, hopefully an important thing that they will be able to use in their CVs and their career progression. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Thanks for reminding us about the need for us to look at ways in which we work differently. This is not a new issue. The corrosive issue of inequality is a long-standing issue, and I think it's a question of how, if we're talking about partnership, how we re-engineer some of those key relationships, which includes the role of local authorities clearly, but also includes that wider perspective. And also I think really helpful for you to mention there the role of employers. So although we've got this kind of parallel session at the moment, jobs has to be a key part of the solution, and sort of activities like the living wage key part of that. So maybe let's keep that in our kind of focus as we go out into the conversation part of the session. Kate, can I bring you in now to share with us some of the work that you've been involved in, and again, just to give us a slightly different perspective on some of the themes we're looking at this morning.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. I'm talking not about a particular Poverty or Fairness Commission, although I have been a member of the Greater Manchester Poverty Commission, but I want to talk about the work we've done as an all-party parliamentary group on poverty. That's a group of MPs and peers from all the political parties, supported by the Webb Memorial Trust, which has funded the work for us to look at the Poverty and Fairness Commissions around the country. And we've really noticed this growing phenomenon nationally of these commissions beginning to spring up and in some cases work through and complete their process of examining poverty and inequality in their area and beginning to put some of their ideas into practice. We've been very grateful to have the support of a research team at the University of Edge Hill in doing that work. They've produced a report, which I have here, but which is actually available both on the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Poverty's website and on the Webb Memorial Trust's website. And if you're interested in some of the things I'll speak about very briefly today, please do take a look at the report done for us by John Diamond and Paul Bunyan, which will give you a little more background about what we found. And I think we were interested in really four things as the all-party group. First of all, why were these commissions suddenly emerging all around the country? What was that about? Secondly, what mechanisms were they adopting? What ways of working were they using? Third, what were they achieving? And fourth, assuming that some good was coming out of them, what could we do next to support their continuing effectiveness and influence? And some of the things I'll say and some of the things the Edge Hill researchers say are, I think, quite controversial, and I'll be very interested to hear people's responses to that. First of all, I think, why have we seen this phenomenon of Poverty and Fairness Commissions? And partly it's because of the leadership of people like Richard Wilkinson, Kate Pickett, the Archbishop of York and others, high-profile, national, if not internationally renowned figures, giving this agenda the push that they have. But of course, too, it's also a reaction to austerity, to the expected increase in poverty in the country that we look ahead to over the coming years. The response too to the state pulling back from some of the interventions and programmes that have been the responsibility and remit of the public sector over the past 2, 3, even 5 or 6 decades. And the corollary of that, a sort of positive sense, coming particularly from the present government, I think, about the good role of philanthropy, of communitarianism, of local solutions to local problems. So that's the positive spin, I guess, as to what might be seen as a response to a negative trend of the state rolling back. In terms of ways of working, we found that the commissions that we've looked at, and we were able to meet 14 commissions located around the country in Parliament last November, and then to carry out subsequent research with individual commissioners. They've been, I think, almost entirely very analytically, very evidence-based. There's been very, very strong bodies of local and national evidence, indeed, to underpin their work. There's been a real attempt to engage with the community as a whole, but particularly with both experts in the field and with people living in and experiencing poverty. There's been a tendency to use a sort of inquiry-based inquisitorial approach to getting information and evidence. I think an interesting question about, is that the only or the best method of the commissions doing their work? And I think the other thing that's been very notable to me, looking at the commissions that we've been able to examine, and particularly those that it seems to have been more successful, is that local political leadership has actually been really, really important to their success. And the idea that these commissions can function as groups of community bodies or charities or well-meaning philanthropic individuals driving the agenda forward, we haven't seen the evidence of that. And I think there's a really interesting question to ask there about why it is that we've still had to retreat back to traditional political structures and power bases, actually to make these commissions effective and to make their work bite. I'm very, very intrigued to hear what people think about that. In terms of the kind of solutions we've seen coming out, they've been very, very pragmatic, I would say. Things like, can we become a living wage borough, a living wage area, or at least encourage people locally to become living wage employers? Can we introduce a credit union for our local residents or support the credit union that might exist? Can we perhaps bulk procure utilities, as we've done in Greater Manchester, to enable, for example, people to access cheaper energy costs? And as Debbie's already highlighted, a big focus across a lot of the commissions in creating local employment opportunities and the role that can be played by commissioners in supporting and encouraging that. They're very much, I would say, solutions in the realm of alleviating rather than eradicating poverty, and perhaps that is a limitation on what commissions can do. It's certainly my observation that it's been a limitation up till now on what they have done. And I also worry, I think, that although the commissions rightly want to focus on addressing poverty in their local areas and how that can be tackled, we do have, therefore, a series of localised solutions, if you like. And I think one of the impetuses for the all-party group's work was to say, that's great, but if we want to tackle the underlying structural drivers of poverty, the whole needs to be more than the sum of the parts. We need to take that localised approach back up again to share and spread and potentially promote national solutions. And so the final sort of areas of recommendation, if you like, that this report comes out with is, first of all, that perhaps the commissions have been both too locally politically led, but also too consensual. That there hasn't been much grit, to be honest, in the work of the commissions that we have been able to examine. It's a lot of like-minded people in a room doing things that they like doing together. And the real challenge to hierarchies, structures and assumptions hasn't yet emerged from the commission model. Question, what could we do, would we want to do it that would mean that it could? Secondly, that there is a need, we think, there was a real appetite from the meeting that we held in Parliament, and people in the room were at that meeting, for the commissions to try to work together across the country to become some sort of poverty network, poverty force, if you like, as a means of calling to attention national powers and national forces, recognising that localised approaches on their own are not going to be enough. And the report makes some suggestions about how that national network, that national alliance might come about. Very interested to hear from people about that. And finally, and repeating something that was said by one of our keynote speakers this morning, it may have been you, Hugh, that we have a general election coming next year. And that is a moment that we should be seizing to put this issue of poverty and inequality absolutely on the political landscape. And one of the ways in which the report suggests that could be done is that, as well as trying to resolve the issue in the local setting, these commissions could become the vehicle for challenge, for holding government, holding power to account. And not to do that on their own, but certainly as a means of brigading local voices. I think that's a very interesting suggestion, on which I hope we might hear some views in the course of this morning's discussion.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Thanks particularly for raising the issue of alleviation versus this whole thing about structural issues. Are we simply kind of papering over the cracks? To what extent are we tackling some of the kind of fundamental things which are underneath the issues of inequality? And also your point about consensus. And there's a risk that, by definition, people who will come to an event like this, for example, and be involved in these processes are there because they get it, they understand it. So that the need to, in a sense, to have some grit, to in a sense to disrupt some of the conversations is important, and to challenge some of the assumptions we all carry. And I hope we can perhaps touch on some of those things today.
I'm going to keep moving across.
I'm going to bring Steve in now. I know you're an academic, Steve, but you're coming here with your Fairness Commission hat on too.
Yes.
So I'll leave it to you just to decide how you approach this topic, and just to share with us a bit of your experience and some of your thoughts,
Sure.
please.
I mean, the way I'd probably steer it is using kind of both hats, I guess, inevitably. Okay. But it's important, I suppose, just by way of introduction, just to say something a little bit about Newport City. For those of you who don't know, it's located in between Bristol and Cardiff, and it certainly has a big history in wealth generation, for sure, and wealth creation. But it's very located in the past, You know, it's a city that was born out of the Industrial Revolution, very much dependent upon heavy industry, docking, steelworks, coal obviously in South Wales. And inevitably over the last 30 or 40 years it's suffered considerably from the decline in those kinds of industries. In many ways, in regards to how we understand communities, because that's obviously the central feature of this discussion, it's important, I think, to see its geographical location as being part of how Newport is actually constrained in many respects, because it often gets forgotten, it gets lost in a hole. So when you look at all the usual indicators in relation to disadvantage, what you see in Newport is higher and above averages in a whole range of different areas. I mean, at the moment, for example, in relation to employment, particularly youth unemployment, you know, it suffers from very high levels of unemployment in respect to long-term unemployment especially. So we're dealing with a whole range of complex issues, obviously, which are compounded by the problem, obviously, of the huge cuts that local governments have had to face. So, you know, that's a rather gloomy kind of picture, really, in terms of the context in which Newport is working. But nevertheless, it's also important to point out that, as with all cities, there's a vibrancy to the city, and there's determination to move forward and to develop the city such that it does actually include everybody, that there is a sense in which growth, good growth, as it's been named earlier, is certainly a commitment, I think, from the City Council and from other people as well who are involved in this growth as it's understood in Newport. So that's a bit of a background in relation to where Newport City is at. But in terms of how we understand community, in regards to what we've been doing in the Fairness Commission, we've produced a detailed report for council, and we've engaged with the public through a public survey, and we've done other things as well, very typical of the kind of activities that Fairness Commissions have been doing. But in regards to how we understand community, there's probably three main themes, dimensions, if you like, of community, which we've emphasised in one way or another in the various reports and issues that we've raised in relation to the Fairness Commission. The first, I think, which is important to emphasise, is that we are a very plural community, which I think reflects the kind of plurality that exists across the UK, both in relation to the diverse and conflicting interests that often are manifest within Newport City, but also, most importantly, in relation to the concept of fairness, and this is hopefully where I will be a bit controversial. I remember saying this in London when we came to Westminster, and there's a few raised eyebrows, is that when you use the concept of fairness, this is the way we've set out our story in the Fairness Commission, really what you're using is a hurrah word, is what we call in political philosophy, okay? No one campaigns, does it, outside Parliament saying we want unfairness, we want unfairness. Everybody wants to be seen as fair. So in the first instance, it's very important to say that fairness by itself as a concept doesn't get you anywhere in respect to the kind of political values that you might want to be committed to within a particular community. Now, obviously, then the next question is okay, well, what sort of conception of fairness are you interested in? And that's where the disagreement is located, and that's where the bite is in relation to the political debate. And part of our role within the Newport City Council's Fairness Commission is to open up those debates and notice, for example, that there are many conflicts, many trade-offs, many different conceptions of fairness that are essentially contested. And that it reflects the wide range of political positions and political values that people are committed to. So there's lots of questions, for example, and this came out in our public survey as well as the discussions we had within the Fairness Commission and with Council. There's lots of questions, isn't there, around when is it morally justified to treat people the same, and when is it morally justified to treat people differently? And of course there's going to be many different answers to that question. It was alluded to earlier on in the discussion today. When is it fair to give everybody the same services, in other words, universal provision, and when is it fair to target specific services? And of course, those sorts of questions in terms of how you decide and who you decide to target is bound to lead to huge disagreement and conflict. And part of our role within the Fairness Commission is to open up those debates and to provide some kind of conceptual map for politicians to understand where the pressures are located so that we don't become a rubber stamp for fairness. We've deliberately distanced ourselves from the idea of making specific policy recommendations because part of our role, we're not an elected body, and part of our role, as we've seen it, is to provide an arena which people can actually say, well, okay, you know, if you're going to pursue that particular policy, then you're going to be putting pressures on the concept of fairness that way. But then, of course, you'll be also putting pressures in regards to a particular conception of fairness in regards to another area. So, you know, again, going back to the issue around equality and diversity, sometimes it's fair to treat people the same, sometimes it's fair to treat people differently. The question then becomes when and where and how and who. So that's part of what we've done, and then that's an important part, I think, of acknowledging that we live in a plural community. The other one of the areas that we've been focusing on as well, in terms of how we understand community, is to notice, obviously, in many ways, but it's still opening up all sorts of interesting and important questions, is to notice that we live in an interdependent community. The focus on interdependency and reciprocity within communities, any community depends on reciprocal, independent relationships to maintain and develop wealth and prosperity and well-being for its population. And part of what we've tried to do in the Fairness Commission is emphasise and explore the different interdependent relationships that exist across the community. Now, a lot of the time, for example, it is quite right to focus on the interdependency, for example, between having provision from the state, things like education and training and so on, and the kind of contributions and obligations that might be expected to give back to the community through paid work and through also taxation and so on. So there's an interdependent relationship, as it were, that exists within the context of the labour market and how that gets developed in relation to things like income regeneration and the rest. However, one of the things that we've also wanted to emphasise in the Newport Fairness Commission is that there are many unpaid activities that often go unrecognised and undervalued within the society in which we live in. And the most obvious place for that would be what women often do, unpaid in the home, whether that's in relation to caring for children or caring for elderly relatives and so on. Of course, there's other forms of unpaid activity that don't just necessarily map gender. But the point is that part of our role in the Fairness Commission is being able to encourage open dialogue about those kinds of relationships, because if we're to understand the concept of fairness in part as being in some way or another referring to this notion of reciprocity and interdependency, then it's important to acknowledge the many multi-dimensional ways in which people are able to be facilitated to contribute to society's activities. So interdependency, plurality, two kind of main dimensions, if you like, of community that we've been examining. And then the final one, which I'll shut up after this, is looking at the way in which communities are inevitably constrained. And I think this often gets lost in debate. Partly that constraint is a conceptual constraint insofar as once you ask questions around community, you have to ask questions, well, who's in and who's out? When we're talking about Newport City, for example, there are obvious geographical boundaries which determine who's in and who's out. But on a more to encourage more open-textured debate about boundaries and how we understand boundaries, one of the big questions is, do we see ourselves as a community that's looking outward, that is able to include diversity and celebrate the diverse nature, if you like, of our communities, particularly within cities, or do we see ourselves as closed? And it's at that point where I think very important questions arise about the relationships between different political communities, geographical communities, and of course we can think about that in relation to regions, Wales, England, Scotland and so on, but we can also think about that in relation to the different communities that exist within particular cities. You know, a lot of efforts has been made today, for example, in relation to class differences, but of course there's many other kinds of boundaries that exist within and outside communities, which also affect the shape of our debates about fairness. And one of the interesting questions that have arisen, for example, in Newport City Council is the relationship between local government and national government and the kind of commitments that the Welsh Government have made, for example, to maintaining educational budgets and the impact that has on local government and the kind of decisions that they have to be made. But clearly what you're looking at there is a relationship between two bounded communities that have overlaps for sure. They need to talk, they need to be part of the discourse that opens up these questions around fairness. But the question around the constraints of community then become particularly important, especially in times of economic austerity. One of the other things, just finally, to notice is that as we come out of the recession, a lot of statistics seem to be showing, both locally but also nationally as well, that the beneficiaries of coming out of the recession is very, very patchy. So there are some people who are doing very well, thank you very much, but some people who are clearly being left behind. And that also has to be obviously taken on board in any of the discussions that we're having, is how we understand fairness across time and in different economic contexts. So that's it.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Thank you. Thanks for those 3 key points about fairness and about the community in particular. And also that key question, what does fairness mean? In terms of getting deeper into the conversation about what we all understand by that and defining it, pinning it down, the evidence has a key role to play there, but also these processes, as each of our speakers have referred to. Liz, patiently waiting and listening to the others. You just come in now and give us your perspective, and then we'll have a chance to engage with some of our people in the audience.
Great. So what I'd like to argue is that the role of communities in formulating policy about fairness should be large and leading and could be actually very positive. And for someone like me who advocates civic participation, that's possibly an obvious argument to make. On the other hand, it might be the stupidest argument I've ever made, because it sort of goes against all experience that people have. I know people, I'm guessing, show of hands, know what NIMBYs are, if you do. Anyone know what a banana is? Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. So I know you've had the fair share of these debates in York, and you've really wrestled with it. And fundamentally, that's about what looks like a very, very fundamental conflict of interest between people with resources, the already housed, and people with fewer resources who are trying to get in. So what it looks like is that communities, and I was staggered by the level of mobilisation of communities in York to saying build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything, that people look like they're mobilised against inclusion, against the most marginalised groups. And I'm using land use planning here as an example to highlight the issues, but it goes across different forms of resource allocation. So how on earth can I make this argument that we should actually talk to communities? Because I don't think it has to be like that. When in the research that we've done, we talked to communities in a different way. What we found is them in Bradford articulating some very sophisticated concepts, which speaks to some of what Steve was just saying. So we had conversations in Bradford with people and we said, what do you think fairness is? And some people said, well, it's about everyone getting the same. So in academic terms, you could call that equality of input. So a sense of fairness, we all put in the collective common pot, we all get out the same. Another set of people said, do you know what, we think that fairness, to treat people fairly, sometimes we need to treat them differently. And we refer to that in technical terms as equality of outputs. So we're trying to equalise the quality of life people get out at the end. And in local government geek speak, some people have referred to this as proportionate universalism, as in you want a universal outcome, everyone to get the same at the end, but to get there you need to give people different inputs along the way. We also had a long discussion about the nature of the inputs we're talking about. It's not just public money, is it? It's all the assets and contributions that communities make. So that's a really interesting debate. Should we reward those neighbourhoods and those groups and those people who put more in? So we didn't agree, but the idea wasn't to build consensus. The idea was to say, can we talk about really complex, sophisticated ideas in a sensible way without killing each other? And here I am, it worked. And I think the key to transforming the nature of the conversation is, first of all, let people know who gets what. There's not enough transparent information still about resource allocation. I can give you needs maps for Manchester, needs maps for Bradford. Can I give you who actually gets? No. top secret information. We want more of that. We want less secrecy and more information. I think there should be more true devolved decision making, so that when we're engaging people in these conversations, it really matters what they say, and we give people the trust and the power to make decisions. I think that we should understand facilitation techniques, not as some hippy-dippy, whale music, soft thing, but as actually as hard policy tools in the same way as legislation. So the final set of messages is what makes me think I'm not completely bananas myself, is that we've tried some of this stuff, not just me, but lots of people across the world, and we know it works on a micro scale, participatory budgeting, mediation, deliberation. I'm currently in Manchester following up on the Greater Manchester Poverty Commission I've activated, I don't know if this is good plan or not, I've activated some Anglicans I've mass mobilised Anglicans. I've sent them out and they're collecting data as we speak on people's perceptions. I've got citizens talking to other citizens. Don't tell Manchester University, because this is very dangerous. Yes. But I think the idea that you trust people to have a sensible conversation. There's also some evidence that we can scale this sort of stuff up. One of the projects I was involved in, we did an online deliberation on race issues and on youth issues, which involves antisocial behaviour, with 4,000 people online. And one of the sponsors, central government, we told them we were going to do this, and they tried to stop us. They said there would be a riot and we would cause trouble. And again, we facilitated it in the right way, and we had a very sensible conversation, and we increased tolerance. So, and that was in our last book. People want to read about that. It's called Nudge, Nudge, Think, Think. And some of the work that we're promoting at the moment about these more co-productive ways of doing policy making is in our new book called Rethinking Public Policy Making. And I'd just like to say that we're co-writing it as academics with practitioners. And one of the authors is in the room, Paul McCabe from York City Council. And it's thanks to him that I know so much about petitions against housing developments in York. But we hope and we think that there is a way of doing things differently that doesn't need to lead to completely bananas policy. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Liz. That's great. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. So just in terms of some really key things there about transparency and openness, and we've got open data. We're in a situation where we now have, theoretically, access to information the way we've never had before. How we convert that into intelligence is another issue. Key things about devolved decision making, co-design, enabling communities to, not setting them up to fail by giving them things to do, but not equipping them with the wherewithal and the tools and techniques to get good results. So those are easy things to say. They're complex things to do, and you made them sound very easy, Liz. But I know that they're tricky to achieve, and I know that what you do goes into some of the detail of how you do that effectively. So lots and lots of things for us to pick up on here. Looking at all of you, it looks as though you are in need of a bit of opportunity to interact with us. We have a roving mic in the room, so we're looking for questions, contributions, observations. Gentleman at the back there and a chap up there too. Could you use your format, just introduce yourself, say where you're coming from today, and then just far away.
Okay, my name's Peter Gay. I'm just an interested citizen. I'm very grateful to Liz and Steve for what they've brought into the conversation. I was aware that earlier on people were talking about social capital and economic capital, and we slid very much into just dealing with economic capital. We were talking about engaging people, but very much started to slide towards the idea of we're examining them and seeing which people we need to give our help to. It was a very patronising attitude, I thought. We touched as well on accountability. Who are these wealthy people accountable to? Are they accountable to their shareholders? Are they accountable to their wider communities? interesting to see what counts as a community. Steve was talking about interest groups, but also earlier on we slid into talking about communities as just having a geographical boundary, and I thought that was very limiting as well. I'm full of stuff. But yes, just noting as well that if this is about interaction and engaging with other people, we've spent 2 hours actually just sat here. 2 hours? Yes, 2 hours just listening to the powerful people telling us about what they're up to, and I'm glad we're getting a bit of chance to interact now. Can I stop?
Okay, thanks for that. As we're moving the mic down, let's take another couple of points, and then we'll come back to some of our panelists. There's I think the man in the middle, and then Richard down at the front here. Can I just say, by the way, that this is the first time York has done an event like this. From all of our perspectives, really useful to get feedback on what works, what doesn't work. Certainly, it's the beginning of a series of conversations and discussions. We're really keen to get your feedback, and I think there'll be some information later on how we can gather that from you. So certainly, thanks for your comments, really, really useful, and I think all of us want to have that kind of conversation. So let's move on and do some of that now. Yes, hi.
I'm from Edgehill University. I was one of the authors of the report that Kate referred to there. Just to say that there's a companion report to that. That report's focused on civil society initiatives and fairness commissions. This companion report, hot off the press, and it will actually be on the APPG and the Web Memorial site by the end of this week. But this focuses specifically on fairness commissions and really draws upon the voices of a number of commissioners from across the country. There's just one point really that I want to bring out and just add to really what Kate was saying and what one or two of the other speakers spoke about, and really that's about the social processes and the balance of power. I think one of the things that the fairness commissions have done extremely well, and if you look at all the reports, they are very, very good reports in terms of analysing what is going on in particular areas and really highlighting poverty and inequality within those areas. But there is a difference between, I think, making recommendations and building the political efficacy and a constituency of people who are going to ensure that those recommendations happen. And I think there is still a great deal of work to be done in that regard. And I suppose the challenge, and I suppose one of the challenges that Kate was highlighting for this coming year, maybe as we go towards a general election, the key question, can we build a political constituency, beyond the local, which really puts this, the issue of poverty and inequality, centre stage. And I suppose that is the real challenge, and that is difficult. Building power at a local level and beyond to a regional and national level is the real challenge, I think.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll take one more comment from the front here, and then and rather than doing a sort of kiss of death tour de table and asking everyone to comment, I'll maybe picking up on one or more of these themes. Yes.
My name is Richard Wilkinson. I'm a local. I really wanted to add to the point that's just been made, asking Kate a question. I agree very much with what she said about the limitations simply of local action and the desire to be all-inclusive. But I think that comes out of a frustration of feeling that we're not going to get what we want from local government, and so Labour councils in big cities everywhere deciding to see what they can do locally, trying to be inclusive because there isn't the power to legislate on income differences within big companies and so on, particularly on top incomes. I've talked to most of the fairness commissions, and I've always had a strong impression that they hope to influence Labour nationally, and of course to achieve what we all want to achieve, we depend on a Labour government doing more than doing much more on poverty and inequality than has been possible before. I'd like to hear you, Kate, tell us about the influence these fairness commissions might have had on Labour nationally, and the prospects for stronger policies on inequality. Thank you.
I think the honest answer is so far not very much, Richard. I don't think there has been a dialogue, any systematic dialogue between the individual poverty and fairness commissions and the Labour Party's national policy making process. I'd be interested among commissioners who might be in the room to know if people have had ways of inputting from a local position, but I haven't seen a systematic national engagement, and perhaps, you know, that's not just the responsibility of the Labour Party's national policy making process. It may not know that there's the opportunity to have that engagement, and perhaps it's the responsibility of people like Debbie and myself and other Labour colleagues in the room to bring that to the party's attention.
Can I just mention, it's certainly, I'm on the National Policy Forum for the party, and it certainly was raised at last year's pre-conference session. So there is an awareness of it, but I think Kate's right in terms of how it feeds then through to the policy offer. That hasn't been put together yet.
It's a very strong indication
Yeah.
of what Labour local authorities want from the national government.
Just pick up on Kate's, but are there any other commissioners here who've been involved at a local level who have either tried or are making that connection into the national policy? I mean, timing is critical here, as we said, when we're into election season. Any other views or experiences that you can share with us about how that relationship is working or not working?
Or whether it's working with other political parties, for that matter.
Yeah. Okay. Could we have a mic up at the back there, please?
If I could preamble very brief. Rob Askew, I work for Prison Advice and Care Trust. So it's a charity that supports the families of people in custody, both young people and adults. Currently delivering a project in Wakefield under the Youth Offending Service for vulnerable and disadvantaged young people. And the core of the project is to support their family relationships and provide mentor support. An issue currently with young people in custody is there's an imposition from central government of a minimum working education week. This is being forced through by our Education Secretary and Minister of the Justice Secretary. Won't mention the names in case they appear in a puff of smoke, but there's a disconnect between what practitioners like myself experience on the ground in working with young people and the decision and policies that are made centrally. And I don't wish to make a political point, but it's just an example of the frustration you experience that something is imposed and it seems to be without the groundwork being done, you know, at the sharp end. And the young people that are now in custody tend to present with multiple issues, mental health issues, drug addictions, learning disabilities, and formal education as imagined by politicians doesn't really cut it. And the trouble is this particular policy, or this the implementation of it is about to block a number of interventions which have proved to be effective in working with young people around their problems, their employment prospects, their education in general. So, sorry, it's just an example of, you know, this end, that frustration. So I wanted to pick up what Kate was saying about, yes, there is a need for policy, but somehow to address that, what we experience as a disconnect between...
So there's a lady in the middle who'd like to come in there too. This issue of the disconnect, and I suppose there's a question of trust here as well in terms of rebuilding trust at the local level, and in a sense sort of fixing something which is broken in terms of how we kind of influence policy from the bottom. Yes?
Well, that disconnect would appear to come from the top-down nature of the Fairness Commission. And if they are still just talking shops for the powerful politician-led groups, and they're not connected with any of the people really on the ground or any of the groups who are really disadvantaged, which I accept are very hard to connect with and get their views. I mean, that's a very difficult thing to do, but there are bridges that could be used. The trade unions are an obvious bridge, and the political constituency that is lacking is actually, that's a rather strange way of putting it, it's access to political voice that is lacking, and access to powerful means of expressing views that is lacking, and that's the vacuum that we're in the run-up to the election, and there will be a whole lot of curbs on debate during that time as well.
So the point is about the top-down nature of the Fairness Commissions themselves, and this is sort of more of the same.
I mean,
producing reports. It's not about reports.
Part of our remit is to produce a report, so we couldn't avoid that. That was part of what we committed to in the first instance. But in relation to representation, I mean, we have trade union representation on our commission, for example, as we have representation from the business community as well. We also have representation from young people, although that was particularly tricky to actually get meaningful young people's representation in the committees for all sorts of different complex reasons, as well as other forms of representation which give some kind of rich, multidimensional texture to the voices that are being made within the commission. What I want to emphasise, though, in relation to the experience at Newport, and I think to some extent we're out of step in a way of the other commissions, it has to be said, is that we haven't gone for the list of recommendations at the end of the report type conclusion to this, because what we're more interested in doing is trying to create a space for a different kind of discourse around fairness. And that's not only regarding what politicians say, local politicians in particular, say about fairness and how they conceptualise fairness, bearing in mind the comment that I made earlier that fairness itself is just a hurrah word, it's empty, hot air, really. You need to get behind that concept of fairness to see what different conceptions people are using to make any sense of the debate. But part of what we're wanting to do at Newport is open up different kinds of language, different kinds of discourses, different sorts of debates that are often not said, often get pushed off the agenda, without coming out with specific recommendations, because after all, we're not an elected body for a start. And secondly, if we were to come out with specific recommendations, we would just be coming out with a particular spin of our own of what fairness is, when in fact what we're more interested in doing is opening up debate, recognising that these ideas about fairness inevitably compete. And that's, I think, where the top-down criticism is particularly pertinent, because often debates have been framed around particular understandings of fairness which aren't necessarily reflecting the diverse character of societies and the diverse communities in which we live. So it's a little bit of a kind of defence against some of the accusations that you're making, because we are genuinely trying to get multiple voices, as it were, within the Commission, but also outside in terms of the discourses that we're encouraging.
I can also say in defence of some of the commissions that although they are top down and it has been very much a case of existing political leaders taking initiatives, they have delivered some improved outcomes. For example, the Islington Fairness Commission has addressed pay differentials in the local authority. Now, it's a small step, and it may not be what, if you asked people in Islington was their most important issue, would have been the one that they would have chosen. But nonetheless, you can't decry it as a step that they've been able to effect and bring about.
Yeah, but one of the issues, though, I think, goes back to a number of the points that were made, either implicitly or explicitly, is that policy recommendations may not be the thing that we ought to be going for as an aim, because this is a structural issue as well as an issue around reform. And reform, for sure, will get you certain kinds of distances in respect to some of the issues that we might be interested in. But it's not addressing some of the structural disadvantage and the structural inequalities of power.
Pay differentials do those, Steve.
In part, but pay differentials in part is symptomatic of something else that's going on globally as well, which is not to do with it's very, very difficult to make a real impact on that You know, in Newport have committed to the living wage, you know, hip hip hooray, etc. But there's a lot of kind of swings and roundabouts about committing to a living wage as well. So, for example, it provides a perverse incentive to contract out more work to people who are outside council, which can actually drive wages down in other parts of the community. So let's don't think that living wage is going to be like a magic wand to deliver this.
In Islington, they cut top pay.
Yeah, that's
what I
good.
mean by
That's
looking
good.
at the
That's good.
structural
That's good. But that's not changing the structural relationship between capital and labour. That's all. No, it's not doing that.
But I would say it's addressing structural inequality in pay structures.
Yeah, and that's all to the good. But it's part of a longer journey which cannot just rely on policy reform to deliver these outcomes.
Final words?
I
need to go down.
Yeah. I found the conversation absolutely fascinating, and I'm taking on board, because although I totally get what's being said about just a set of recommendations that, for example, will endorse what is being committed to through the council around the living wage and so on. That's not the whole story. But there are actions, and how we defined our terms of reference, what we would do of local action and beyond. So we've got 3 MPs on that, who then can be, and this is where it is about, you know, the input at the bottom and then the influence at the top, can be mandated to represent your constituents and make sure that this is a priority that's raised in Parliament. And certainly it's a message that Michael Meacher has been doing, as well as myself. And we also have to recognise where different communities are at. You know, and not all communities have had, for example, I think Islington has demonstrated quite a bit in terms of community empowerment and engagement. Where there's no historical engagement that way, we have to recognise and start where they're at and make sure that this is a dynamic, ongoing process. We've certainly tried to engage our communities in every aspect of what we've done within the Commission, but it has been uphill, but it's only a start. It's the beginning, not the end.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. I'm going to come in there because I know there's several people with their hands up. We've been waiting patiently, but I'm afraid we've got to take a break. We'll carry on this conversation over coffee because everyone's coming back in here at 11 o'clock. If they come back in and we're still going on, we've got a problem. Very frustrating not to have more time, but can you join with me? Thank the panellists, and thanks to you for staying with us.